Let me just pull up the documentation that you told me to read through as well, so we can talk specific lines. Yeah, because I had some. It actually did kind of stimulate some questions in my brain. Um, hmm. So we're specifically just looking at the covenant section, which is massive. Which is massive, but uh, of course, I mean because it's like it's. I mean, this really is kind of one of the core pieces of the fabric of the system, right? Is like how the software is actually structured. Yeah, because the split is like. Um, so don't get me wrong. I think there's some real valid, like logical reasons to try and keep code and data separated. Um, but like a lot of the split comes down to like keeping in mind that everything that you're working on needs to be serializable, right? Like that it's always possible to build structures in RAM that's like um, not actually possible to just print to a hard drive or like send through the network without blowing something up. And mhm, 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 mhm. Yeah, there's no dehydration and rehydration and instantiation. It's like if it's alive, it's alive, right? So I like the idea of trying to push this into IPX, like um, some kind of like stub format that like clearly that like talks about how it sits in the broader IPFS ecosystem as like an extra, like if you take this thing that we're adding, like you get all these extra cool doodads. Um, I think that's a good approach. Um, Paragraph 2 here, you're saying you're starting to talk about like children as sub packages. That was the first thing that kind of jumped out at me. Um, you mean children in the exact same sense that you mean them, like on just a data object that you've been talking about, right? Like the child chain. Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah. So that lends me to believe, or leads me to believe that the state inside the, sorry, the state governing the application. What am I trying to say here? Um, if it's a child chain in the same way, then basically, like, I have to sort through the implications for that in my head a little bit because it feels like. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Right. Um, okay. So like I guess the question here that kind of came to my mind when I was reading this part is just children are sub packages, forks as different releases. I'm down for that. You're so far you're basically describing like how this mirrors Git um, or any other kind of like distributed version control system. Um, mhm. Mhm. Right. Okay. That's that's the idea behind Nix. You might want to read about that project. Um, mhm. Hmm. I got like an image in my head when you were just talking there that I think is like, please correct me if I'm wrong. The first kind of most primitive thing that you're working on here is the actual like source artifact, right? So as you change the source artifact, you're adding more pulses onto the chain, and like that represents kind of like growing the model that you're trying to build basically over time. Now, like if a build folder is just a child of that, then you can basically like what I'm starting to see is that you build into the build folder off of a given pulse, and then you have a build folder off of that pulse that can then also go off in its own lineage as well. And you can do that off the next pulse and off the next pulse. And then each of those build folders would then have running instances of the code that are executed from them that are each based off of like the pulse that build folder was, right? So like you can always trace the lineage all the way back to like not just what code not just what code change I based this build off of, but also what build I based. Um, right. So you can fill it in afterwards, basically. Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Yeah. Um, I think there's some other implications around like if you had like thousands of running processes that were all based on different versions, like they can automatically know how to talk to other versions of the process. Like you, there's this thing now, like basically the way that when we advance our software is we kill all the processes and then we fire them back up, and they're always talking on the same kind of language with each other, right? Like if you upgrade all your microservices in your stack. Mhm. Wait, go over that one again with me. You like what's the thing? What's the thing you're upgrading there? Yeah, so there's like a call by reference semantics there, basically. Uh, right. Uh, right. Right. So, like this, the center of every application is basically a registry, like a living registry almost. Right. Yeah, I remember. That's a really good model to have. Like if you think about a registry, like so it suddenly just dawned on me that like in a world full of permanent software, like you're never going to have something like npm as like a giant mutable indicator of like what's the cool thing people are using now. You're going to have like you're going to have like a billion roving npm ish things that are like like centroids, I guess, for like development, right? Like mm, right. Right. So um, I think a good property to try and keep in mind, like in any system like this, if it's going to be long lived, is that you might build something and you might eventually want to push more structure out towards the leaves. Like as like a monolithic kind of application starts to get unmanageable by like one governing body, you might consider breaking it apart into microservices or whatever the equivalent would be in this world. And the idea that like everything um, can be a registry, like every single application chain can like eventually become its own like or every single chain in an application can eventually become its own app chain, right? Yeah, it's sort of the like the runtime equivalent of what I've been saying about like state is that as you grow this big blob of binary state, you might eventually be interested in kind of augmenting like chunks of that state with their own governance model or with their own kind of chain, right? So you might be interested in like ejecting out, right? Hmm. Yeah, right. I don't want to get too far afield, but like I just want to say I really like the idea of like not making any component inside of like the cluster of chains that are running have like too much fundamentally different of a behavior than any other one. So like the idea that like there is a center to this app that is a bit of a registry that like um, is basically responsible for like being the central point of coherence that makes things interoperable. Um, like the fact that you could push that responsibility down the tree, I think is and like if take something that used to be like a package or a library or like a dependency, I guess even is the right word for it, and eventually turn it into its own application. Like that's been something I've been kind of like struggling to figure out in these conversations since we've been having them is like what um, like how do you define the boundaries of the code that you're writing? How do you define the boundaries of the application, I guess? Right? Because like mhm, So onto the state. Actually, good that you brought it up. There's some pieces in here that I don't understand. Um, yeah. So generally, like state API, I get installer, I get import map. Like, is unclear to me. Like, is that just the dependencies? Like, hmm? Mhm. Hmm. I didn't know that. I didn't know that was in browsers. Uh, just looking that up. Yeah. Okay. So that's basically like the Webpack rewrite rules. Like whenever you're importing from whatever, it's telling you what is the thing you're importing from. Hmm. Right. Uh, right. And then registries is pretty obvious too. Like that's when you're going out for a search. Like in the general space, you'd be looking in the registries, right? Right. Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. The last one is one that I didn't quite grok. The like referencing to a specific pulse ID, like it more just because of where it is in the list. Like you're saying, it's like a package lock. I get that. You're saying it's like a file you could pick up that would tell you exactly what IDs to use when you're running this covenant, right? Right. Hmm. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, right. But like, I guess what's a little loose right now in my head is, are you like all of these things are reads, right? Like they you don't actually have to send in any sort of request to any of these chains to. Okay, that makes sense. because like if you're gonna pick up some chain at some block that's like way back in it, then like are you forking it if you're writing to it? I would say yes. Mhm. Okay. Um, mhm. Right. I wonder if it doesn't make sense to use a different delimiter, like to reference a path in Chainland. Really? Right. 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 Yep. Yeah, I actually agree with that. Um, like there should never be a context where you're able to look at like two different things that are A slash B slash C and not know which right and not know which one's chain and which one's a file, right? Okay. Yeah, okay, I'm down with that. Mhm. Uh, so life cycle. I agree with everything in here. This makes sense. I assume when you say resolve, you mean um, like you're going through the coding process here. You're saying right, publish turns it into a chain ID. Resolve would be I'm putting the chain ID in, or I found the chain ID and I'm loading the code up now. execute is mhm, right, right. And then seven like seems like a level mix to me again. Um, Side effects supplied from the binary image are executed. Do you mean things like foreign function interfaces and like nodes like C interface and yeah. Mhm. And you're running that in the binary as well. Like just you're yeah, yeah, I agree. Um and it looks the same as the like Pierce stuff that you were showing before, or like has it morphed very much from then? Right. Yeah, I mean, like they work a little different, right? Like some of them are coming from things that um, like have no master, I guess, right? Side effects need to be executed by validators so that they can be compared and like double checked, and that so that their like noisiness can be handled by the validator network, right? Hmm. It's all good. I mean, I think like it could be sometimes a little bit of a nightmare to try and squish too many ideas into the same thing, right? Yeah, yeah. All right. So dependency management. I agree with everything here. Um, I like that there's like a good call out for the three different types of dependencies. Um, Obviously, I think like something needs to be baked into the structure of the system to heavily incentivize um, like pushing chain land structure down into code land structure, if that makes sense. Um, I think you want the virus to spread, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like like when you're thinking to yourself as a programmer like that I'm going to add this code dependency, a lot of times like that's just going to be the easiest way to do what you're doing, right? But like we have to somehow get between the developer and that decision and say like, but should you turn it into your chain? Yeah, right, right. I guess the other thing too is like warming that code up in code land so that it might be ready to receive some invocation means it's warm and it's costing money. And if you don't invoke it, like then it's just sitting there humming, right? But if it's in chain land, when it's idle, when it's not being invoked, it's not costing anything, right? Right. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think what I'm trying to say is I think there's actually already an economic incentive for doing it, right? Like the more things you can lift up to chainland, the more the more you don't pay costs for idling systems that like are not getting engaged with very much, right? Hmm. Right. Because like um, when you're pushing it into code land, it's like it's sitting there underneath of somebody's runtime engine, and who knows what kind of energy that thing's using. Now, like like Node takes a lot of energy just to sit there and be like, is there anything? Is there anything? Is there anything? Right? And like if I'm asking 50 things if they have something to do instead of just one, then I'm spending 50 times as much effort basically, right? Now I don't think you're going to hit a point where that's actually financially meaningful until your code is running a lot, right? Mhm. Right. Yeah, that's a good service that you could provide. Uh, right. Or at least like the top 150 packages that like might be meaningful. Yeah, I'm really loving how this picture's emerging that like your incentive is to not spend energy. Because right now the blockchain incentive is to spend as much energy as possible. It's so fucking weird. Yeah. So the other thing on the dependency management part here is that I want to like I want to give serious consideration to whether like two and three are actually different. Like I think a covenant is a type of chain, the way that you've positioned it. Um, well, two is a subtype of three. Like there seems to be less levels that things can operate at if you're gonna go whole hog and make like the covenant actually. Mhm. Right, right. Mhm. So they do bleed together a little bit, right? Like in the minds of developers, um, I don't really honestly care what version of React I've installed in my application. When I'm spinning up my application, I just install React and I start using it. In a very real sense, like when you're starting on something, you're usually thinking about give me the latest version of it. Right. 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 Yeah. Okay. I mean, I can see what you're saying. Like, it's really as soon as you actually start using the thing, suddenly it becomes a lot more important to version lock it and to make sure that the builds are reliable and repeatable, and like that you understand everything inside of all your dependencies, and that you get what I mean. Like, I guess I can think of it's possible to. I guess what I'm ultimately trying to say is that I think there's probably some cases where um, you could make the decision to go either way if you're relying on a foreign like service that is doing some code activity for you, where they might provide like, how do I stop sounding stupid right now? Do you know what Hasura is? It's a real good GraphQL engine. that wraps Postgres and gives you like real good real time stuff. So there's a service version of Hasra that I can use where I'm just like, here's my GraphQL API. Like, just go ahead and be responsible for it. And then there's a library version which I can pick up. And like now I really care about how it's written and like how I'm managing the versions and stuff, right? Hmm. Yeah. So that's great. I love that they're different than each other. I think I want to mentally play around a little bit with like what does it mean to choose one or the other in any given context. Yep. Yep. Yeah, but you're not going to be able to get away from it, right? Like you're basically talking about whose responsibility is it to make sure that like the code is getting features added to it and is running smoothly. And like I sometimes I want to take that responsibility on myself, right? I would argue that like my life has almost always been easier when I make somebody else take that responsibility. Right, right, right. Uh, yeah, I mean, there's like it gets a bit fuzzier than that, right? Like there might be services that are providing you, like they're providing you a toolkit to build your own data source that you have to manage some of, but they manage the rest of. Um, right, and realistically, the covenant like should be entirely yours in a certain way, right? Like you should know exactly what you've put into it. Right, right. No, I'm probably confusing things to be honest. Like I said, my head's a little wobbly today, so um, right. Yeah, I mean, like on some level, if you're calling out to the code, like you are calling out to a side effect from a chain. Like I think we had this discussion a long time ago when we were talking about how does the isolator work. It's like you can treat your actual code runtime as an oracle to the chain, and the chain is just like an interface to it, right? Right. Hmm. Um, I guess it's no. I don't want to labor the point anymore here. I think it's good. It's actually a good thing when there can be like not just a binary of like, is this a service I'm paying somebody for, or is this a code I'm writing myself? Like if you can like have more gray spaces in the middle between those two things, because I think like that. Why is that good? Is because that's kind of the interface that like most of the programming world is on right now, right? Like or the spectrum, I guess. Like everybody like doing code professionally is asking themselves like, do I want to make a like a product that people download and use, or do I want to make a service that they subscribe and pay for, right? um, at least in the developer. Yeah, 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 actually, I mean that's a really good way of putting it. I think like if I guess if I want to work together, I have an open source library, and if I want to like make money off of other people and treat them like they're outsiders, then I would close the bubble and I would like lock down the interface. You know, like I won't provide the interface where you can load this thing as code onto your own system. I'll only provide the interface where you can talk to it. You know? So the last two things here, well, I guess they're not the last two. The repo covenant and the covenant covenant. I am I am so confused by the covenant covenant. Yeah. Okay. So it's like the root object model, but for code. Like yeah, the object, but it's but for yeah. Okay. So so like what kinds of actions do you see this thing receiving? Sorry, I guess number one question is the covenant running as a chain anywhere? Like is it running as a service anywhere? Yeah. Mhm. Okay. So is it something that's just like a is this like a foundation managed thing that's like only written to by a very small number of people? Like the rights. Um, and like, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is like, is this a reference implementation or is this a library? Or is it a service? Right. So walk me through the process there. The validator. In here is a covenant, but how does that relate to the covenant? Actually, you know what I think is happening here is I'm still in old programming land. The covenant is a chain, right? Right. Um, like what I'm wondering here is like, are you proposing that this is like um, something that the validator uses to check into like what I guess what's the provenance of the code covenant that the validator is reading compared to this covenant? Like if I send a validator a code covenant, does it need to be somehow derived from the covenant? Does it need to be because like go ahead. The problem is right. So when you're saying you're you're not taking like another way that you could think of this is like I have derived my code covenant in some way or another from the covenant, so I can always trace back to like which version of the covenant I'm basing um, my code covenant off of if they're both chains. um, and you would still have all those properties if things are forkable, right? Like there's no privileged seat. There's like a main trunk line for the covenant that's hopefully merging back all the good ideas from the community about what interface. Right, right. Hmm. Right. Right. So, right. Yeah. Right. What I think I'm trying to get at here is that, like, in a very real way, if you said that all code needed to inherit from the covenant, like, if in order to start a new code unit in the world, I forked I forked some pulse on the covenant, and I started working from there, then then you're basically defining a world where um, all of execution in the entire world is like understood back to the first moment when anything was ever executed, right? Like the beating heart in the right, yeah, yeah. And actually, I guess it makes sense to think about it as like if I didn't have access to a pulse to derive everything off of, like, is it fair for me to restart the whole system, basically? So code provenance just doesn't even really matter that much. It's more like conforming to the interface. Right. But isn't that a little bit more wobbly? Um, yeah, there's no hard. Go for it. Yeah, yeah, okay, I get what you're saying. I maybe there is no value to like proving where you started your idea in the overall evolution of the system. I I'm not sure I'm thinking about it in terms of an attack surface right now though. I'm thinking about it in terms of um like a pride point, like to show, like to prove all the time. Mhm. Right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, you should make it as like loose of a requirement as possible for people to add stuff to the system, right? It shouldn't. Right. Yeah. So this is a that all makes sense. Yeah, I agree with that. Why you could call it the reference covenant. Hmm? Chain that you like. This is the one that it's like it's got when it's blank when it starts, right? Mhm. Right. Mhm. Oh, okay. I understand. Like, yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know a good name for that. Right. Mhm. Right. I mean, it's like it's the one that's actually doing the publishing, basically. Right. I'm not sure what to call it. It's not a gatekeeper. It's not a publisher. It's not like uh, I I think so, but I also don't think there's a better name like off the top of my head. So like I didn't immediately grok that it like that it wasn't some sort of standard library or something like that. You know, like um, Yeah. Yeah, actually, but now with with the new context there, I am starting to be a bit more curious about what you're saying that like anyone can provide their own. Like what kind of guarantees is it really giving you about the covenants that you're publishing? Just that they but is there a point where you've given such weak guarantees that the resulting running code off there in the world is incapable of communicating with the rest of the world? And is that like something that like I understand we're not running the code. Like we don't care if we have to communicate with it or not, right? But like and that's like a low level interface, right? Like that's like saying please have the same layer zero as that. Or the layer one. Right? Okay. Yeah, so like I feel like a better name is going to indicate that this is um like this is the piece that's going to like keep you coherent with the rest of the system somehow, right? And we're not saying that like that has to be a certain way. We're just saying like why would you want to mess around with that too much and lose your ability of getting the network effect of being on the same system as everyone else? But I think mhm, right. Um, right. So this thing is like this is the sales pitch of the whole system, basically. Um, Right. I I think like a slightly nicer thing that we can provide than any random like packaging and runtime system is like a deeper way of modeling trust to begin with. Well, I mean, like it's what you keep getting to when you're talking about like ownership of chains, basically, right? You can measure and keep kind of permanent track of like who's had something to do with this thing in all of time, right? And you could never do that in a normal code system. I mean, it exists. The data exists. It's just spread out on a billion computers all over the place with like random usernames that like some random IT person came up with for executing that code on that computer, right? Um, no, I think what I'm trying to say is like what's really important. It's actually really important to get this covenant down right, like to get the documentation of it, like being as kind of um, big tent, like open hearted, I guess, as possible. Like to say like this is why we built it and this is what we think it means, and like this is how we're going to use it to build a system where like even if you don't opt into any of these features or even if you replace it completely, like these are the ways that we provide like models that allow you to grow trust with your community if you use this thing. Yeah, and also like I mean I think there's a lot of devs that are pretty burnt out on economic white papers as like the core thing that I'm thinking about in my code right now. I mean crypto is a like nightmare world at this moment in time. Um, right. Yeah. No, I'm with you 100%. I mean, I'm with you 100%. I'm down for whatever you choose there. I don't like what I don't like about crypto is I don't like the idea that somehow like speculation is here and doing shit is here. Um, to me, like doing shit should be here and speculation should be here, right? Um, a little off track, sorry. I like what I want to say is like it occurred to me the other day when I was thinking about this stuff that like um, I've never ever worked with like a like it's like kind of fundamentally new to think of every single datum as being like durable and ownable, right? Like it lives out there and like I change it when it needs changing and I don't think about it other than that. I don't need to like push it back and forth between a bunch of systems. Like it's just ready and sitting there for me whenever I need it. And everybody knows it's mine. And like And I think that a lot of devs are going to like fall for that right away. Like, especially if you explain to them that like it really is theirs in a very real way. It's not theirs because you're in a collective compute environment that operates at the speed of a snail. It's there because it's there because it adheres to um, like a really sensible like a concept of what we could mean when we say ownership and durability. And so then it basically becomes the job to explain why that meaning is the correct meaning, right? Because like you don't have a consensus mechanism that's jamming it down everyone's throat, right? But you know you need to get buy-in from people that like this actually does capture a meaning of ownership and a meaning of like durability that doesn't exist out there. You know, I just don't. I don't know how to. I don't know. I'm not. I'm not a salesman. You know. Comes down to trust so much, right? Like the thing is, like, why is everything mangled into the shape of like SQL queries right now? It's because like there's a few trustworthy developers that are pushing real hard to make sure that SQL stays like something that's a collective good, right? And they're doing it by like making a few SQL implementations that run that I can like fire up and I can put in the middle of my system. But I don't know. I had a better way of saying this the other day when I was thinking about it, and it kind of slipped my mind a bit. But it's like right now, all these big companies basically have snapped up all the devs that could sit there as like fixed points in the ecosystem, providing like a really trustworthy outcome where I know that if I go to use this type of tool or that database or like this library, that you know they're going to sit there and keep working on it because like if they don't, everything in the world's going to fall apart, right? Yeah, where not even extinguished, they're still there. They're just owned. Like they're owned by big corporations who are like, you know, I think acting at cross purposes, like to us, to what we actually want, right? Like what's the thing that's actually stopping like a durable concept like the software equivalent of like riveting and bolting as a technique for building bridges from actually emerging is that like you have these guys sitting in the middle who like actually know exactly what could become the rivets and bolts of software and they're trying to sell you on their like service that they built 8 layers up from there that you have to engage with because otherwise like your shit's not going to work, right? And anyway, I've gone into polemic here a little bit. I like when I read the covenant, when you describe it to me as like what it's meant to do, I believe that this is probably the piece that like needs to tell the story of what the system is. It's the and that means it's going to be a pain in the balls to implement. But like as soon as you bring the idea of like, oh really? Okay, because this is like it involves level mixing and like the validators like no longer being like outsiders but are now insiders. So yeah, great, cool. Um, I have to jump. Is there anything else that you like want to go over quick, or we just type covenant string? And so, where are you at on the like the code for this? Hmm? I like what you just did there. I like the steps that you're thinking as like the kind of most basic to kind of MVP steps. I think like write those down and like write a little bit about what each one of those steps means. No, no. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you showed me a like a rough version of this. I think this is great. Like, yeah, this is like marble diagrams, right? Like, you're going to be able to get so far. I think there's probably a decent chance that we could like if you could keep talking in this language long enough, like you can prove pretty strong points mathematically about what you're doing. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, let's try to book a call sooner. Yeah, for sure. All right. Thanks, man. Have a good one.